Right now, maybe he's just got really good advisors. Another day and more evidence that Pope Francis's take on income inequality not only is making sense, but that it's also popular. We've got the details to back it up. And then remember the "if you like your health care plan" line? Well, a new ad is already twisting that to try and make Democrats swing here come election season. But how and should Democrats respond to this thing? That in tonight's political grab bag. And later, NSA spying smacked down by a federal judge. But what does it all mean, and the impact on the agency from an information security expert, the challenges at the High Court from our legal team. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us this Tuesday evening here, December 18th, or is it Wednesday? We begin tonight with a topic that we have touched on frequently in recent days, Pope Francis's call for compassion, if you will, when it comes to inequality and lack of compassion shown in return. The pontiff calling on the rich to help, respect, and promote the poor, warning of the laws of competition and the survival of the fittest, where the powerful feed upon the powerless. Direct quotes here from the pontiff. He also went on to say, and knocking trickle-down economic theories that Francis said have not yet worked. Opposing Francis, none other than Rush Limbaugh, of all people, referring to the Pope as the Vatican's Obama. And then,
this is an unfettered anti-capitalist dictate. This is just pure Marxism coming out of the mouth of the Pope.
But today, a few stories popped up that would seem to spell advantage Francis. The AP asking 36 economists about income inequality. They all said hurting the economy. And polling's out that backs up the sentiment that the Pope has said. Americans believe the government favors the wealthy, and they think government should reduce the gap. Again here, they think it's the government's job. Another new report, 1 in 10 Americans, 10%, who work full-time here do so and still fall below the poverty line. A raise in the minimum wage might help. Nearly 7 in 10 Americans in 2 polls, they all say they support a minimum wage increase. We're talking going from $7.25 to more than $10 an hour. But all these things are fine and well, but the question is, are they politically viable? Or will the Pope, his approach, lose elections in 2014 if Democrats pick up the mantle? Now, here to weigh in on tonight's panel is Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Jonathan Yeadon, he is a Democratic consultant with the Advance Group and a former executive director for the Kings County Democratic Party. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. Okay, we saw the face-off when you have the Pope and Rush, and only in 2013 can you literally have the two speaking to one another here. The polls seem to say, the public says, we feel it too. This is a real problem. And economists even saying it doesn't make economic sense to have such a gap, and a growing one at that, between have and have-nots. Do you think it translates, though, into policy, or more, maybe even suddenly in November, into election politics?
I do. I think we saw it here in New York City with the income inequality being a major issue for de Blasio, and then subsequently President Obama made a whole big speech on it. It's a major issue, and it's affecting people tangibly. People see it, people feel it. They see that we have this sort of increase in the number of jobs over the past several years, yet incomes have not been on the rise yet at the very, very top. They have more and more and more and more wealth. And so there's a problem here, and it's an unsustainable problem. Things need to be done, raising the minimum wage, a reinvestment in education, because studies show that the more we educate our population, the better chance they have to move up the economic ladder. And these are all things that benefit
hear you,
it.
But if you talk about the Tale of Two Cities, which was the campaign slogan here of de Blasio, it's one thing in the 5 boroughs. But you don't even have to go to, out in the Midwest. How about like in the 19th district in New York? How about some of the swing districts? Can you say that without being labeled a socialist, or somebody who's going to say wealth redistribution, which is
I mean, you saw Elizabeth Warren do it in Massachusetts as well. I mean,
but again,
the deck is stacked against the deck is stacked in favor of the wealthy and against the poor and the less fortunate, those that don't have the same opportunities in life as the wealthy and the elites do. And so until that gets fixed and until the deck becomes more of a level playing field, I think it translates in New York City, it translates in Massachusetts, and across the country. There's no question.
I don't know if it translates across the country, because there's a lot of people who sense that, well, if you're in a bad way in this country, it's because you haven't done enough to get yourself out of the bad way. I really think the other half of this argument, not just to the safety net, but the compassion, or the lack of compassion that we've heard from Rand Paul, who says, you know what, if we keep offering you unemployment insurance, that actually hurts you in the long run. Those arguments, when they're framed like that, don't serve Republicans well. But if they can make the counter arguments and show compassion at the same time, I think they'll actually win the arguments on a lot of these, because people don't want to spend the money. The safety net costs money. Welfare costs money. Food stamps cost money.
But these workers are working full time, as you said, yet they're still getting government benefits because they can't break out of poverty, and they still are eligible for these benefits because they're working hard, but they're just not able to move up.
To me, the most empirical thing, Dom, was that 2 different polls said more than 70% of Americans are up for raising the minimum wage. Now, I know a lot of the same folks who say, we talked about the Time series, about that young girl at Dasani and her family that played out and led to so many discussions. We talked about it in this program at length. Some of the same folks who might say, oh, you know what, well, maybe the parents shouldn't have had so many kids or whatever else. Forget about what I think. You'll hear that response. 70%, 70%. If the majority of Americans believe that you're going to jack the minimum wage up to $10 plus, in fact, when asked what they thought the number should be, they said $10.50 an hour. If an overwhelming majority of Americans feel that way, it lends you to think that maybe this thing, if sold the right way, could do the trick, because now it's not just the shiftless and the lazy and the crackheads, it's people even working that are declared below the poverty line. Half of New Yorkers under the adjusted poverty line are underneath the poverty line.
Well, Richard,
can this sell politically?
No. I wish the political climate was exactly the way you two just shaped it up to be.
Yeah.
But I have to agree with Andrew on this one, and I just look at what's happening in Washington now. The battle on the Republican side is that they haven't cut enough. They want to do away with government. They feel that too much is being done. They feel that too much is being done for those Northerners up in New York, and we know what that's code language for. So I wish that you two were accurate.
But Don, wait a second. You obviously followed the last election. Probably one of the defining moments for Mitt Romney was the 47% line, okay? You can argue, we saw in states overplaying of the Republican hand, whether it was on the abortion issue like we saw in Indiana and another state. You also saw Missouri, thank you. You also saw with the government shutdown, how badly that played in. I agree, if it's Occupy movement, that's the kind of vision and imagery of this thing, it's going to be the worst thing for Democrats. But if Rush Limbaugh is criticizing the Pope of all people, right, there is a middle ground that you can sell this to say, I'm not for handouts. I'm just for having a remotely level playing field or a fair shot. If you sell that, I think it can work. And again, the imagery of somebody attacking the Pope and calling him a Marxist, the Pope, who's widely popular, it says to me, this is going to be a tough one for the Tea Party to navigate, as much as it is, even more so than for Democrats to figure out.
I just don't see it in the House. I just don't see it in that. I agree with you that the argument can be made, and perhaps more importantly, should be made.
You just don't think you can sell it. All right, you're about coming up with a soundbite or a bumper sticker. Help craft one that doesn't scream, because to some populism is a bad word, socialism, but screams equity. How do you say that? How do you convey to the public, this isn't about being bleeding heart, this is just about what's good for the economy?
Well, I don't know if you can do it on a bumper sticker, but I think the general message needs to be that the deck is clearly favoring one side of the population over the other, and it's just not working for all Americans. How do you, as you just said, you have the majority, a supermajority of Americans who believe one thing, yet it's not going to happen in government, and that's a problem overall. And I think it's that type of, I think it's the fact that you have overwhelming support for progressive policies that benefit the majority of Americans, yet you have our elected representatives that aren't abiding by that, and ultimately it's these elections that I think need to hold them accountable. And so it's just bringing that up, bringing that to the forefront, I guess, and making it about real people and not about the wealthy. And I think what Elizabeth Warren did shows that on a statewide level. Granted, it's the most blue state in the nation, but other people are starting to pick it up as well. And I think we'll get to it later in the show. I think some of the problems Democrats might have in 2014, but this is a major, major asset that they have to run on. There's no question.
I think you can sell the rising tide lifts all boats, which it certainly did from 1940 to 1980, when the middle class did particularly well, and when the middle class does well, the entire country does well. The problem is that we've entered into a mindset now where it's competitive within the middle class. It's middle class person against middle class person, and I'm going to get the best of you because that's how I get ahead, as opposed to a sense that we can all get ahead, together.
I think if somebody could convey this isn't about handouts, this is about the middle class. If you do that, if you can make the argument that you're not trying to help out the welfare queen here, which is how it's going to be painted from the right, but you're trying to help out the guy who's trying in the middle class, whoever wins that, it's like in everything, whoever controls the middle of it, wins. If you can control that middle and say, this is about you, pal. This isn't about, trying to do some government handout here. This is about trying to give you a fair shot so you don't have to come to us. If you can do that, then you're right here. But I think, I never thought I'd say this, but the Pope, of all people, is leading where I think this argument goes. Okay, when we come back, on the other side of the break, there's a tough new ad out that hammers Democrats for the same problem that has hit the president. If you like your insurance, you can keep it. We all know how that ended up. So how should the Democrats respond to it? That's in our political grab bag straight ahead.